At our Thanksgiving dinner, with the whole family crowded around the table and the smell of roasted turkey filling every corner of the house, my daughter tapped her wine glass 3 times. I hadn't seen that signal since she was 12 years old, and when I found a moment to pull her aside, what she told me left me standing in my own kitchen, feeling like the floor had just dropped out from under the world I thought I knew. I appreciate you being here. Before I go any further, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from right now. Certain details in this story have been adjusted for privacy and educational purposes, but the truth at the heart of it, that is exactly what happened. My name is Leonard Calloway. I am 64 years old, and for 26 years I worked as a fraud examiner for the Ontario Securities Commission. I have spent the better part of 3 decades learning how people lie with paper, with numbers, and with a smile. When I retired to my house outside of Barrie, I thought the hardest thing I'd ever face again was the backyard fence that needed replacing every spring. I was wrong. The signal was something my daughter and I had created when she was in grade 6. She was quiet by nature, a child who absorbed too much from a room and couldn't always find the exit gracefully. I taught her 3 light taps on whatever surface was nearby, a table, a glass, a book, and I would understand. It meant, I need you to get me out of here, without making a scene. She had used it exactly twice in her childhood. Once at a school fundraiser when a teacher's husband was making her uncomfortable, and once at a family reunion when my late brother-in-law had too much to drink and started talking politics at volume. After that, it faded away, the way most childhood codes do. I thought it was gone forever. It came back to me on the 3rd Thursday of November. My daughter, Miriam, is 36 years old. She is a school librarian in Aurelia, a steady, thoughtful woman who has always been more careful than I gave her credit for. She arrived at Thanksgiving with her husband of 2 years, a man named Warren Stiles, who worked in what he called private wealth consulting. Warren had warm eyes and a handshake that lasted exactly 1 second too long. I had always found him difficult to read. Not unpleasant. Not obviously wrong. Just opaque in the way that certain very practiced people are opaque. My wife, Patricia, a retired nurse who can smell a lie the way I can smell a forged document, had said on more than one occasion that Warren talked a great deal without ever actually saying anything. I told her she was being unfair. I was wrong about that too. The table was full. My son Raymond and his wife were there with their 2 boys. Patricia's sister had driven up from Hamilton. We had the good china out, and the house smelled the way it's supposed to smell on that particular Thursday, cedar and gravy, and the kind of warmth that makes you believe the world outside doesn't exist. I was refilling water glasses when Miriam reached for her wine. Her eyes were fixed on the window, not on the table, and then she tapped her glass 3 times. The sound was soft, nearly swallowed by the noise of the room. My heart registered it before my mind did. An old reflex, dormant for 24 years, fired without warning. I set the water pitcher down. I did not look at her directly. I excused myself to check on something in the kitchen, and I waited. She came in 30 seconds later and closed the door behind her. Her face was the careful, managed face of a woman who had been holding something for a very long time and had finally decided she could not hold it 1 moment more. "Dad," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's been moving money, not ours together, mine. The account my mother helped me set up after Grandma died. He's been using my password." The smell of the roasting pan on the stovetop suddenly felt unbearably close. How many people have sat at a table that felt like safety, while something was happening just underneath it that would change everything? She told me she'd noticed it 2 weeks earlier, a transfer she hadn't made. She'd confronted Warren quietly, and he'd told her it was a joint management strategy, that he'd intended to tell her that it was moving into something with far better returns. She had not known what to say. She had wanted to believe him. She loved him. So she'd sat with it and tried to make it fit into a shape that didn't hurt. But the shape kept getting worse. I told her to go back to the table and act as she normally would. I told her I loved her and that we would handle this. I told her to tap her glass again if she needed me during dinner. She nodded and straightened her shoulders the way she used to when she was a girl preparing to walk back into something difficult. I stayed in the kitchen for another moment. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass of the microwave door, and I made a decision. Retirement was over. How many fathers have stood in a kitchen on a holiday and felt the walls of their home suddenly become a crime scene? Patricia came in to check on me. I told her just enough. Her face went still in the way it goes still when she is calculating something clinical. She put a hand on my arm. "She's been pale for months," Patricia said, her voice quiet. I thought it was the new schedule at the library. I should have pushed harder. We're pushing now, I told her. We went back to the table. I watched Warren Stiles cut his turkey and laugh at Raymond's story about a broken snowblower and accept a second helping of stuffing from Patricia's sister. He was very good at being present. That particular skill, performing warmth, is one I had seen many times in my career. It almost always belongs to people who are working very hard to keep you from looking at their other hand. After dinner, when the men moved to the living room and the children were put in front of a movie, I found a pretext to sit beside Warren near the bookshelf. I asked him casually about his practice. He talked about private equity access for families who couldn't typically qualify for institutional windows, about a fund structure that had delivered consistent 12 to 15% returns for 3 consecutive years. He said the intake periods were narrow by design to protect existing investors from dilution. I nodded and asked the name of the fund's registrant. He told me it was a numbered company under a parent umbrella in Alberta. He said it with the confidence of a man who had said it many times and never once been asked a follow-up question. I said nothing more. I refilled his coffee. You want to know the difference between a man who manages money and a man who steals it? The honest one gets uncomfortable when you start asking about structure. The dishonest one gets more charming. That night, after everyone had gone and the dishes were done and Patricia had finally gone to bed with her book, I sat in my study at the oak desk I'd had since my first posting with the OSC. The room smelled of old files and the particular dry warmth of a house that has been heated all day. I opened my laptop and I began with what I still remembered how to do. The numbered company Warren had named was registered. It existed. That was the first thing they always get right. The address listed for its principal office was a co-working space in Calgary that offered registered business addresses starting at $60 per month. The fund's stated returns 12 to 15% annually, consistent. No down years were a sequence that should not exist in any legitimate fixed income or equity vehicle over that same 3-year period without extraordinary luck or extraordinary fraud. The auditor listed on the fund's disclosure document was a firm I could not locate in any provincial registry. None of this was evidence. All of it was the smell of smoke. I pulled Miriam's account statements from the PDF she'd forwarded to my encrypted email before she'd driven home. The transfers were surgical. Small enough not to trigger automatic alerts, frequent enough to add up. Over 14 months, $53,000 had left an account that my mother-in-law had funded from a life insurance payout, an inheritance that had passed through 3 generations of women in Patricia's family, money that carried the specific weight of someone's entire working life. I sat back in my chair and listened to the house. There is a particular silence that follows the moment you understand the shape of what has been done. I knew that silence well. It lived in the space between the last piece of evidence and the first breath of what comes next. By midnight, I had drafted a memo to myself. By 2 in the morning, I had made a list of calls to make the following day. By 3, I had stopped sleeping entirely and begun the second memo. The next morning, I called Daniel Fong. Daniel had been my deputy director for 11 years and was now running his own forensic accounting practice out of a converted warehouse office in Kitchener. He answered on the second ring, which meant he was already at his desk, which meant nothing had changed. I told him I needed a deep background review on a private fund and the individual named as its managing director. I told him it was personal. There was a pause. How personal? He asked. My daughter, I said. Another pause. Then, send me everything you have. I'll start today. While Daniel worked, I drove to Aurelia. Miriam had taken the day off. She met me at her kitchen table, looking like a woman who had not slept much either. Her apartment was a warm, organized space full of the kind of careful details that tell you a great deal about a person. Stacked library holds on the counter, a hand-drawn map of a hiking trail tacked to the wall, photographs arranged by season rather than by date. Warren was at his office, or so he said. We sat together, and she showed me everything she had. The fund documents were polished and dense, printed on heavyweight stock, with a layout that communicated seriousness without technically delivering any. The prospectus used the phrase capital protection structure 17 times and never once defined what that structure consisted of. There was a risk disclosure section that was, on careful reading, a legally airtight document stating that the fund bore no responsibility for any outcome whatsoever. Do you know why fraudulent documents are always so long? Because length creates the impression of thoroughness. Because most people stop reading. Because by the time you reach the clause that actually matters, you are exhausted, and you have already trusted the weight of the paper in your hand. He showed me testimonials, Miriam said, sliding a folder toward me. People who said they'd been in the fund for years. Real names, real cities. I looked at the testimonials. They were specific enough to feel credible and vague enough to be impossible to verify. No surnames, no contact information, just first names and provinces, and sentences like, "I was skeptical at first, but the results spoke for themselves." "How did you two meet?" I asked. She looked at me the way children look at their parents when the question is the one they've been dreading. "At the library," she said. He came in to use the reference desk. He was researching municipal bond structures for a client. We talked for almost 2 hours. I kept my face neutral. A man who walks into a library to research bond structures is either an unusually specific professional or someone who has done considerable work to appear to be one. I made a note. I spent the afternoon at Miriam's kitchen table working through the fund documents with a highlighter and a legal pad. Beside me, she sat reading and occasionally looking over at what I was underlining. The apartment was very quiet. The only sound was the radiator and a cardinal outside the window and the scratch of my pen. By 4 o'clock, I had identified 6 specific deficiencies. No audited financial statements, only internally produced performance summaries. No registration number traceable to any provincial securities commission. A redemption clause that required 6 months' notice and permitted the fund to delay payment at its sole discretion for up to 2 years. A power of attorney rider embedded in the subscription agreement that granted the fund managing director full authority over investor assets during any declared period of market instability. That last clause was the one that made my pen go still. I had seen that clause before. Not the same words, the same architecture. It had appeared in a fraud case out of Mississauga in 2019, a scheme that had run for 4 years and ruined 62 families before anyone thought to look behind the returns. The managing director of that fund had been a man named Harold Vess, who had disappeared before charges were laid and had not been located since. I looked at the name on Miriam's fund documents. The managing director was listed as a man named Grant Ash. I pulled up the photograph I'd found in the corporate registry, a headshot submitted with the business registration. Something in the jawline and the specific angle of the ears sat wrong with me. I forwarded the image to Daniel Fong with a single line. Cross-reference this against Harold Vess, Mississauga fraud case, 2019. Daniel's response came 12 minutes later. "That's him. Vess is Ash. Same man, different province, different name, same clause. Len, she needs to freeze that account today." I called Miriam in from the living room and I told her what I had found. I told her clearly and without softening it, because she is her mother's daughter and she does not need things softened. She is capable of receiving hard truths, if you deliver them with respect. She sat very still for a moment. Then she said, "He told me about Harold Vess once. He said Vess was a cautionary tale. He said Vess was exactly the kind of operator his fund was designed to protect investors from." The air in the kitchen went heavy. A predator is always the first to warn you about predators. That is how they buy your trust. They name the monster and stand beside you, looking at it. And the whole time, they are the monster. We froze the account that afternoon. Miriam called her bank directly from her landline, an old instinct I had taught her years ago. Never conduct sensitive financial business on a cell phone you haven't recently swept for apps. The bank's fraud team confirmed that a transfer request had been submitted that morning for the full remaining balance. It had been queued but not yet processed. We stopped it with 11 hours to spare. That evening I called my contact at the Ontario Securities Commission. Her name was Sylvia Park, and she had taken over my old portfolio when I retired. I had given her my first case files, and she had given me a bottle of single malt and a handshake that meant more than either of us said. She listened to what I told her. She did not sound surprised. She sounded like a person who has been watching a certain shape move in the water for some time, and has just been told it has finally surfaced. "We've had 2 complaints in the last 6 months with similar structure," she said. "Both Ontario families. Both smaller accounts. One woman in Sudbury, one retired teacher in Peterborough. Neither wanted to press it because they were embarrassed. Shame is a wall around the victim that the thief builds for free. It costs them nothing and it protects them completely. The average fraud victim waits 14 months before reporting. In that time, the money is gone, the trail is cold, and the fraudster has moved to the next province. I have documentary evidence of identity fraud, securities fraud, and an active attempted transfer, I told Sylvia. I also have reason to believe the managing director has a target list. How many names? She asked. I don't know yet, I said. But my son-in-law married into my family 6 months after my daughter's inheritance was publicly announced in the Aurelia packet. The obituary named the estate value. A silence on the line. Then, I'll have a team available tomorrow morning, Len, but we need Miriam to cooperate formally. She will, I said. She's the one who sent me the signal. Patricia was in the doorway when I hung up. She had been listening. She is the kind of woman who knows when to listen and does not pretend otherwise. How bad is it? She asked. It's bad, I said. But we caught it. She came and sat across from me at the oak desk. She looked at the legal pad covered in my notes, and the stack of fund documents, and the photograph of the man who had been sitting in our living room eating our turkey 18 hours ago. She married him, Patricia said, quietly. She did, I said. She loved him. She did. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then, so did we. We let him in. We passed him the stuffing. Marriage is supposed to be the most protected door a person walks through, when the person who holds the key is the one who breaks the lock. The damage goes deeper than any account balance. The next morning I drove back to Aurelia before sunrise. Miriam had asked Warren to come home from his office early. She'd told him she wasn't feeling well, which was true in every sense that mattered. I arrived first and sat with her at the kitchen table while the city outside was still dark and the only light was the one above the stove. She was calm. That particular Callaway calm that runs in the line, not cold, not numb, but settled. When you have spent your life around a parent who works in fraud, you develop either a deep fear of financial systems or a deep competence around them. Miriam had developed competence. She had already printed and organized everything she needed for the OSC interview scheduled for 10 o'clock. I should have come to you sooner, she said. You came when you were ready, I said. I kept thinking I was misreading it. I kept thinking I was the problem. He's very good at making you feel like the problem. I know that pattern. I have seen it in depositions and victim statements for 26 years. The methodology is consistent because it works. First, they make you doubt your competence. Then they offer to manage what you no longer trust yourself to manage. Then they manage it straight into their own accounts. You weren't the problem, I said. You were the target. There's a difference. Warren arrived at 8:30. He came in through the front door with a bag of coffee from the shop down the street, and a clean shirt and the warm-eyed expression of a man who has no idea the walls have already closed around him. He stopped when he saw me at the kitchen table. The coffee bag stayed in his hand. His eyes moved from me to Miriam and back. That particular calculation, a man running the numbers on how much you know, is something I have watched across a lot of tables in a lot of rooms. It always looks the same. The warmth in the eyes goes flat. The smile remains because the face hasn't caught up yet. Leonard, he said, I didn't know you were coming out today. Sit down, Warren, I said. He sat. He set the coffee on the table but did not open it. His hands were still. I placed the fund documents on the table between us. I placed Daniel Fong's written analysis beside them. I placed a photograph of Harold Vess from the 2019 Mississauga case file beside that. Warren looked at the photograph for a long time. That's not me, he said. The ear shape is distinctive, I said. Forensic comparison is quite reliable on ear geometry. The OSC has a team available. He was very quiet for a moment. Outside, a plow was working its way down the street. The sound of it was rhythmic and steady, like a clock. I want a lawyer, he said. That's your right, I said. The OSC team will be here at 10. In the meantime, I'd like you to understand something. He looked at me. My daughter is the most capable person I know, I said. She signaled me at the Thanksgiving table. She used a code we made up when she was 12 years old because she trusted me enough to ask for help. She will be fine. This is about what happens to you next. He said nothing. If you cooperate with Sylvia Park's team and provide a full accounting of every account, every transfer, and every other name on your target list, that will be noted in the prosecution recommendation. If you don't, I will make it my personal project to make sure the Sudbury woman and the Peterborough teacher and every other victim you've accumulated across this province has their day in front of a judge. Warren looked at the table. He looked at the coffee bag. He looked at Miriam, who was watching him with the clear, steady eyes of a woman who has made her decision and does not need him to approve of it. "There are 9 names," he said finally, "on the current list. I'll give you everything. Confessions are not conclusions. They are the beginning of paperwork." The OSC team arrived at 10. Sylvia Park came herself, which told me everything I needed to know about how seriously they were treating it. She was compact and precise, and she shook Miriam's hand first, which was the right thing to do. By noon, Warren Stiles had been cautioned and transported to a holding facility in Barrie pending formal charges. By 2 o'clock, the co-working space in Calgary had been contacted by the RCMP Financial Crimes Unit. By 4 o'clock, Daniel Fong had provided a full forensic trail of the fund's transaction history. There was an entry twist that made my stomach drop. The 9 names on Warren's list were not random targets. They had been assembled using data purchased from a company that aggregated public estate notices and obituaries, a legal, commercially available service used legitimately by lawyers and financial planners. Someone had adapted it into a hunting tool. Someone had built a system for identifying recently bereaved families with named inheritances and profiling them for vulnerability. That someone was not Warren. Warren was the front man. Warren was the handshake and the warm eyes and the library visit. The actual architect of the system was a woman named Donna Claridge. Donna Claridge ran a boutique estate planning consultancy with offices in 3 Ontario cities. Her firm had been the original source of the data. She had been selling information about grieving families to a network of operators for at least 4 years. She had never directly stolen $1. She had simply provided the ammunition and collected a finder's fee. The law is very specific about what constitutes fraud. It is less specific about what it calls a predatory data intermediary. But Sylvia Park was creative, and her prosecutors were good. How do you tell a grieving family that their loss was entered into a spreadsheet and sold? I drove back to Barrie that evening in the dark. The highway was clear, and the sky above the escarpment was that particular deep blue of a Canadian November night that has no equivalent anywhere else in the world. Patricia had kept supper warm. We sat together at the kitchen table, just the 2 of us, and I told her everything. She listened. She did not say much until I had finished. Then she said, "The woman who sold the data. She would have had our names too." "Yes," I said. "From Margaret's obituary." "Yes." Patricia was quiet for a moment. She was cremated in April. The notice was in the paper in May. Warren and Miriam met in September. 4 months, I said. Patricia set down her fork. He was in the library on purpose. Yes. He didn't fall in love with her. He selected her. Yes. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "She's going to need to hear that it was not her fault. Not once. Many times. For a while." "I know," I said. "You'll have to be patient." "I know." Patricia reached across the table and put her hand over mine. "She sent you the signal, Len. She trusted you to come. That's not nothing. That's everything." The weeks that followed were the particular grinding kind that don't make for dramatic stories, but are the actual substance of recovery. There were victim interviews. There were asset tracing exercises. There were conversations with Miriam that lasted 2 hours and covered the same ground more than once, because healing is not linear, and a father who has spent his career handling fraud cases does not automatically know how to handle his daughter's broken heart. Warren Stiles, whose legal name turned out to be Warren Stilinski, a detail that surfaced during the identity verification process, entered a guilty plea in February. He provided full cooperation in exchange for a sentencing recommendation. The 9 families on his list were contacted. 7 had already made initial investments. 2 had not yet transferred funds. The recovered assets totaled just over $600,000. The unrealized losses, the money already moved through shell accounts into offshore structures, amounted to another $200,000 that the forensic team spent 3 months chasing across 4 jurisdictions. They recovered most of it, not all. That particular detail, not all, is something victims carry for a long time. Donna Claridge was charged with aiding and abetting fraud and breach of privacy legislation. Her defense argued that selling publicly available data was not illegal. The judge found that when the explicit purpose of that data sale is to facilitate fraud against grieving families, the legal framework adjusts accordingly. She received a fine and a prohibition order and a suspended sentence that I thought was insufficient, and said so publicly when asked. Insufficient sentences are a category of injustice I have made peace with. I am still making peace with it. Some days it goes better than others. The most important moment of that entire period did not happen in a courtroom or a fraud examiner's office. It happened in March, on a Sunday, when Miriam came to the house in Barry and helped Patricia clear out the winter porch, and then stayed for dinner. Raymond and his family came. The boys ran in circles until everyone was tired. We ate late, and the conversation moved the way it moves when people are genuinely comfortable with each other, sideways and slow, touching on things and leaving them and coming back. At some point during dessert, Miriam reached over and tapped her wine glass 3 times. I looked at her. She was smiling. "I just wanted to see if you'd still hear it," she said. "I'll always hear it," I said. The room was warm. The boys were fighting over the last piece of pie in a way that would resolve itself in approximately 40 seconds. Patricia was laughing at something Raymond's wife had said. The windows were dark with the early March night, and inside was everything that I had spent 6 months working to protect. A family is not a fortress. You cannot seal it against every threat. What you can do is build the kind of relationship with the people inside it where they know in their bones, without question, that the signal will always be heard, that the code will never go dark, that no matter how long it has been, the door from the kitchen will open and the right person will be standing there. I have seen what financial fraud does to families. I have read the victim statements and sat across from people whose faces carry the particular exhaustion of a betrayal they did not see coming. I have seen marriages end over it. I have seen parents and children stop speaking. I have seen inheritance, the physical expression of one generation's love, for the next converted into a memory of humiliation. What I want you to hear, at the end of this story, is not the part about the charges or the restitution. It is the part about the glass. Miriam did not understand every document she was given. She did not have my background, or my years, or my specific ability to identify a misused power of attorney clause on page 11 of a dense prospectus. What she had was the instinct to know that something was wrong before she could name it, and the courage to send the signal anyway. She tapped that glass 3 times into a crowded, noisy Thanksgiving dinner and trusted that someone who loved her would hear it. That is the whole lesson. That is all of it. If something feels wrong in your financial life, in your relationship, in a document someone is pressuring you to sign before the window closes, tell someone you trust. Not tomorrow, now. The window that is actually closing is the one they don't want you to notice. The legitimate opportunities in your life will still be there after you've slept on them and talked to someone who loves you and had time to ask questions that make the other person uncomfortable. The ones that vanish when you ask questions were never opportunities. They were traps with deadlines. Do not let your politeness be used against you. Do not let your love for someone make you doubt what you can see clearly with your own eyes. Do not let shame keep you quiet for 14 months while someone converts your grandmother's life savings into a shell company in a co-working space. Tap the glass. Someone who loves you is listening. I keep a small indexed card in the top drawer of my desk. On it I have written the 6 questions I wish every person would ask before signing any financial document. Who is the auditor, and can I verify their registration independently? What is the process for withdrawing my own money, and how long does it take? Is there any clause in this document granting another party power over my assets? Can I have 2 weeks to have an independent advisor review this before I sign? Are there any fees that apply if I choose not to proceed? And why is there a deadline? Those 6 questions will not protect you from every threat, but they will end the conversation with anyone who is not on your side. The honest advisors will answer them readily. The others will get warmer, more urgent, more personally disappointed in your hesitation. That reaction is your answer. I retired from the OSC because I believed the work was done. I now understand that the work is never done. It simply moves closer to home. Last October, I gave a talk at the Aurelia Public Library, Miriam's library, to a group of about 60 people who came on a Tuesday evening to hear about fraud prevention for older adults and their families. The audience was mostly in their 50s and 60s. A few were younger, brought by parents. At the end of the talk, a woman in the 3rd row raised her hand. She was perhaps 70. She had white hair and reading glasses, and the particular stillness of someone who has been carrying something for a while. "My son," she said. "His wife. I think something similar is happening. I don't know how to say it to him without him getting defensive. Come up afterward," I said. "I'll give you my number." She came up. I gave her my number. She called me the following week. We spent 40 minutes on the phone. I referred her to Sylvia Park's team and to a specific family mediation resource I have used with other families. I don't know how her story ends. I know how it started with a mother who noticed something wrong and finally said so. That is always how the right story starts. With someone who refuses to stay quiet. Trust your instincts. Protect your people. Tap the glass.